I had a horrible experience of school. For me, like many others, school was not the best time of my life, as is often espoused to be the case for many. Rather, it was categorised by bitter conflict, dire stress, and generally poor mental health. All too often, we're presented with a rather one-sided image of education. Yet if we are to rethink education and move it forward, we must draw on a broader range of people's lived experiences of the system. I'd like to share with you my story of the hardship and trauma I experienced at school and how I drew upon that trauma in a constructive manner to change my school for the better. Specifically, we're going to look at the solution that was born out of a year and a month of tedious discussions between me and my former school, the culture of well-being, and the promise this holds for addressing the youth mental health epidemic that is spiralling out of control. Also, we'll be considering how we can most holistically change school cultures, incorporating every level of the education system and leaving absolutely no stone unturned. I went through most of my education with an attitude of indifference. I was never one to enjoy school, yet I never really questioned my circumstances. I just sort of, plodded along, doing what was required of me by law. But when I came to secondary school, the balance was upset a bit. The first disturbance came in my social life. I had been quite reclusive hitherto, yet when I got to year 8, the second year of secondary school, my friendship circle expanded and I became part of a solid group of 4 lads. I also enjoyed success on the romantic front. I valued these relationships deeply, but became paranoid that, actually, my friends didn't value me in the same manner. I worried that they were actually going out and doing all sorts of things outside of school without me, that I wasn't actually part of the group, I was excluded, and they didn't identify with me as I identified with them. This climaxed about 20 to 4 in the afternoon on Thursday the 5th of May 2016 in an exchange of hurtful words and actions. This caused my worst nightmares to manifest themselves in reality. Now, I really wasn't a part of the group anymore. Having been so emotionally attached to these relationships, the sudden loss of them caused my mental health to rapidly and severely decline. What ensued over the following 3 years was manipulation, mind games, and general animosity towards each other that damaged my mental health particularly badly as, unlike them, I didn't have other friends to fall back on for support when things went wrong. I also endured death threats and disgusting sexual abuse from some of these individuals. Day after day, I was being forced to associate with the people who were doing this to me, and despite literally getting on my knees and begging to my parents to get me out of there, it perpetuated and deteriorated. Around the same time, my younger brother was preparing to take his Year 6 SATs, which is the elementary school leaving qualification here in England. Although only 2 years had elapsed since I had taken mine, the UK government had reformed the SATs quite significantly in that time, making them more rigorous. In other words, more difficult. Suddenly, 10 and 11-year-olds were expected to know the answers to questions such as explain what the past progressive tense is, differentiate between a subordinating conjunctive and a coordinating conjunctive, and set out the definition of a modal verb. I don't know about you, but I'm 19 now and I still don't have the foggiest of what any of that stuff is. The greater rigour necessitated greater sacrifice in terms of revision and study time, denying young people the innate liberty of play. In reality, this translated into children spending hours trapped inside, drowning under mountains of worksheets and practice papers, a dramatic and brutal contrast to my own experience of the exams, for which I didn't actually need to do any preparation. I spent my time playing as 11-year-olds should. My brother suffered meltdowns as he cracked under the workload of this abhorrent system. The sounds of his tears, his screams and his righteous anger became all too familiar over those weeks. To such an extent, I can still hear it in the back of my mind right now. It wasn't just my brother. When the dreaded day eventually came, Monday the 9th of May 2016, the first day of the exams, I came home from school to find our fears confirmed. The first day of the tests had been a disaster. there were worrying reports emerging from across the country of children, whole classes of children, breaking down in tears during the exams, and teachers shifting from invigilator to counsellor duties mid-test. It was as though the education system had turned schools into fear factories, manufacturing mass misery amongst young people. In my sceptical teenage mind, I interpreted this as a deliberate, calculated action inflicted on children by politicians who consciously took the decision to do this knowing full well what was going to happen. I concluded it was morally wrong, and I swore from that day on that I had to get justice for my brother and his peers. But before I could contemplate the education revolution I'd sworn to achieve for my brother, I came to the realisation that these dreadful reforms weren't just contained to the SATs. The General Certificate of Secondary Education, the secondary school leaving qualification which I was being entered for that September, had also been subject to similar reforms. During a particularly difficult class one day, a teacher began to rant at us about how our exams too were tougher, and that the significant efforts and sacrifices invested by previous cohorts would not suffice from us. That was a significant moment for me. Immediately, my mind began to race as I feared that I too would suffer a similar fate to what my brother had endured with his Year 6 SAT, possibly worse. Having seen what my brother went through, my mind produced distressing mental images of myself suffocating under paper and weeping. I realised that this deliberate assault on young people's mental health was marching on. The government had attacked my brother and his cohort, now they were coming after me. My fight against the system had just become a fight for self-preservation. Going into Year 9, the alarmist culture I witnessed that day firmly embedded itself into my school's culture. Significantly more apparent than it had been prior to the exam reforms. Young people were being constantly bombarded with dark and dreary prognostications, exaggerating the importance of the GCSEs. We were told that if we didn't get our GCSEs, we would be, and I quote, on Tesco brand bread and beans, on benefits, unable to provide for our families, and that all those who knew us would write us off as failures. The only way to avoid this, we were told, was to consistently sacrifice time in devotion to securing our GCSEs, leading myself at least to feel like a failure if I dared to take time for myself. Then it was prophesied that we would and should, as it was made out that there was absolutely no alternative than full-on glory, achieve extraordinary things and bring to ourselves the laurels of fame. Ordinary accomplishments were devalued, and the consequence of this was that I felt both my prospects narrow and insurmountable pressure being heaped onto me that was ultimately maladaptive in the endeavour to achieve my GCSEs, as whenever I tried to study, my mind would obsessively pore over the prophecies and what I had been told was the scale of the task ahead, generating anxiety that prohibited me from concentrating. My grades began to suffer as a result, meaning that these prophecies were becoming self-fulfilling. But the effect of the culture on my grades was not my primary concern. The effect this had on my mental health grossly superseded that in importance. I began to show symptoms of OCD and panic disorder. The OCD meant that I couldn't even walk straight. One night, whilst out in public, I ended up walking backwards, weeping as I went, a horrendously demeaning experience. Another occurrence saw me put myself in a situation that was physically dangerous. I experienced panic attacks for the first time ever, having absolutely no idea what was going on when I suddenly started vibrating and feeling nauseous at 11:30 at night, and my mother had to come and help me to the toilet as we thought I was going to be sick. I was literally paralysed by fear. I knew full well that this had come about due to the stress caused by school. I first began to show symptoms of OCD during my end-of-year exams in Year 9, where I followed the school's advice regarding hard study time, only to end up with mediocre grades and worse mental health, which eventually had physical consequences. The panic attacks started after we were given only 2 weeks' notice of a major end-of-year exam series in Year 10, which took place against the backdrop of a significant deterioration in my fortunes on the social front. Due to all of this, I came to see education as a threat to both my mental health and, due to the OCD, to my physical safety as well. Although I have now thankfully overcome many of these adversities through a combination of individualised coping strategies, namely meditation, and activism to improve the situation more broadly, I am still haunted by the spectre of trauma. If now someone were to describe themselves as enduring a similar experience, I'd most likely experience a rather scary trauma response, going straight back to that first night I had the panic attacks. It plagues me to this day. I've been left permanently scarred, seemingly never to be fully restored or repaired. It is almost as if now every day will be a school day in the darkest depths of my subconscious. Yet I realise something very important, that I wasn't alone in this struggle. A piece of research published in 2018, the same year I started having the panic attacks, by the Association of School and College Leaders, abbreviated as ASCL, demonstrated that I was only one of many young people on the receiving end of a widespread systemic failure. The ASCL polled their membership, comprising primarily of head teachers and principals, and found that 9 in 10 of them testified that the tougher new GCSEs were harming young people's mental health, triggering panic attacks, sleepless nights, self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Of the 586 school leaders who said that the new exams had led to additional stress and anxiety for young people, 460, so 86%, said they had led to panic attacks for pupils. 394, 74%, said it had led to depression. And most worryingly, 340, that's 64%, that's over half, raised the alarm bell on the new exams causing young people to self-harm. I needn't explain how serious that is, as it only takes one bad move when self-harming to unintentionally inflict fatal damage on oneself. The government seemed to be prioritising league tables over young lives. Indeed, further research has found that children and young people are being taught that success is achievable only through accepting the tyranny of testing, the need for competition, and the coerced pursuit of goals shaped by standardised assessments. A finding that summarises the culture I experienced in my own school and suggests is occurring further afield as well. As more and more smut churned out into the news, I concluded that this was indeed a widespread and systemic failure, validating my view that action was necessary and spurring me on ever more in the fight for justice. Earlier on in Year 10, I had instigated my action by standing for election to my school student council, pledging to fight to improve the situation surrounding mental health and exam pressure in my school, and won. At every student council meeting I attended, without fail, I would raise the matter of the prophecies and the toxic nature of communication around exams in discourse between teachers and young people. But despite my award-worthy persistence, every time I raised the issue, it would get beaten back, with claims of, oh, we have to do that because otherwise young people would have no motivation to learn or study. Not only does such a proposition overlook the fact that learning is innate and instinctive, otherwise how would babies learn to walk and talk, but it also fails to realise that applying such intense pressure does not work for most pupils. Research has consistently shown that when people believe they are being observed and evaluated, when the pressure is on, those who are experienced have an unfair advantage over fresh learners, especially in academic and intellectual undertakings. One such study, from Aiello and Douthit from 2001, found that when people are being observed and evaluated learning a new difficult skill or thinking creatively, then their performance declines as opposed to when they aren't, and in that case, the effect was near universal. Due to the school's resistance, Year 10 passed with nothing to show for my tenure on the student council. The school had just counted me at every turn. When September rolled around and I commenced Year 11, the final year of secondary school wherein I would sit the GCSEs, I stood for re-election to the student council as the problem was still very much alive. However, with little to show for my first term, I came second in a poll of my form group. But, fortunately, The Student Council had shifted to a model of having 2 representatives from each form group. So because I came second, I did manage to get back onto the Student Council, and so the struggle continued. Again, I would raise the matter without fail at each meeting until one sunny morning in January 2019, at a Student Council meeting, I raised the matter again, regurgitating all the disgusting prognostications we'd been given by the system. And I don't know what it was. If I communicated it differently, I was still quite frustrated, and I'm sure it still would have been evident in my voice, or if I did something a bit different. But it landed on the ears of the staff much differently this time. They shot back, aghast, visible horror upon their faces that such slurs could have been uttered in their school. How could this have happened? It's terrible. This time, it was taken more seriously. A general notice was issued to all teaching staff shortly thereafter, advising them to lay off the prophecies, and the school in general began to undertake a cultural shift away from the toxic culture I had endured and towards what I've come to call over the years a culture of well-being. One wherein students are taught the value of rest and hold it in equal regards to work, ceasing to stigmatise those who rest as scroungers. One wherein all members of the school community remain mindful of the language they employ in communication during times of pressure. One wherein students are actively encouraged to put their mental health first and always take adequate time to do things which matter to them, for it is recognised that good mental well-being is a necessary prerequisite to academic success. As well as laying off the prophecies, the school initiated better mental health training for all its staff. They ramped up the support they provided to Year 11s during exam season, putting on mindfulness workshops and significantly changing the way they communicated about the exams to Year 11s. And that contrast in the way the school communicated about the exams is evident in how they handled the final Friday before the exams in 2017 and how they handled the same Friday in 2019. In 2017, they put the pressure on by playing the final countdown by Europe over the school intercom precisely before everybody went home. On the same Friday in 2019, however, they gave a laid-back assembly, reminding Year 11s to take time for themselves over the weekend. Although, if you ask me, this alone is too little too late. The healthy communication should be woven into discourse at all stages of education, not just when it comes to the final exams, and the support should be offered to lower year groups as well. They also amended the school timetable and placed greater value on non-academic, low-pressure enrichment activities, which often involve giving back to the community, going out and doing genuine, meaningful good. They established an annual wellbeing week which took place each October and climaxed in a rare free period on a Friday afternoon. Such a thing would have been unthinkable under the old culture. About 3 years later, the school received an Ofsted Inspection. Its previous inspection, conducted in the December of my Year 11, about a month before the culture of wellbeing was introduced, slammed it as inadequate in all areas, leading to it being decried as one of the worst schools in all the land. It was so bad, it was being covered abroad. However, in its latest inspection, its rating for personal development has risen to good. And on the first page of the report, in only the second paragraph, it is denoted, and I quote, "Pupils cherish the support they get from staff, including for their mental health and well-being. Clearly, by changing course, listening to the pupil voice, and putting well-being at the heart of their ethos, the school environment significantly improved, to the point where even its staunchest critics, i.e. myself, have to acknowledge the progress it has made." So, taking a broader look at the culture of well-being now, what does it actually look like?